shot fired by a young Virginian in the backwoods of America set the world on fire. Horace Walpole, English essayist, writing about a 22-year-old George Washington. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, when I was but 22 years of age, I did indeed set the world on fire. Young, somewhat impetuous, ambitious, and wanted to make a name for myself. Wanted to strike a blow. So at age 22, I actually started a world war, not by intention, quite by accident. So a young man who wanted to be known, I became known. In the councils of Europe, the courts and councils of Europe, I was called a murderer, an assassin, and even worse, all because I had started a war with France and its Native American allies in May of 1754, when I led an ambush against a party of French who were ostensibly on a diplomatic mission in the wilds of western Pennsylvania. 30 Frenchmen, sizable fraction killed, including their leader who claimed to be on diplomatic mission. So at age 22, I was accused of being an assassin. And I felt that things were pretty well up and my life was pretty much over, yes? I mean, how do you overcome that? Murderer, assassin, beast. I'm 22 years of age. Yes, you're chuckling, and it's quite all right to do so, yes? To overcome that. Overly ambitious, they said. Wanted to make a name for himself. Impetuous, yes. Overeager. Also, how many of you in this room are demonstrative of a temper? It's all right to admit it. You may be considered in good company. One hesitant, the hand goes up somewhat hesitantly. Well, that was me. You all have, I am sure, this image of Washington as the man off of a piece of currency. I was young once, obviously. I'm returned to you, summoned as I have been from the pages of history. I stand before you at age 43, the age I was the first year of the War for Independence. 43 years of age. My hair right now is currently undergoing a transition, yes. My own hair. Never wore a wig. I was a redhead in my youth. Usually there's applause from the redheads in the group. Dark red, English auburn, but over time Mother Nature took care of my hair color. So it's in process of transitioning, and it will eventually turn all white. I stand at 6 feet tall. Your historians, as I mentioned, some of you, I see familiar faces from earlier in the day, and you heard me relate that your historians have been quite generous in adding to my stature. I have heard I was 6'1", 6 feet 2, 6 feet 3, 6'3 and a half, 6 feet 4. Quite generous. 6 feet. There's one person to whom you never tell a lie, and that is your tailor. So if you go back through the records in my papers, my orders to London, to Philadelphia, 6 feet. In boots, 6 feet 2. Now it was Lady Washington, my wife. She stood at 4 feet 11, 5 feet barely. She came up to here on me. And it's been said of Lady Washington that when she earnestly desires the attention of her husband, that's me, up she goes on tippy toes, grabbing or reaching for my lapels, and she will gently bring me down to her, pulling me down so as to gain my attention more effectively. Her shoe size, 2. My boot size, 13. So she is quite diminutive. With respect and in regard to some of the other things you may have heard, rumors, I keep receiving these interrogatives about a cherry tree. It was on the receiving end of a hatchet that I wielded as a young boy. I can assure you that that never happened. But I did, in the 1780s in particular, once I returned to the life of a farmer at Mount Vernon, I did order some cherry trees to be cut down on the west front of the mansion. They were sick, they were in process then of dying, and they were in need of removal. If you go into my diaries, you can see where I directed that they be cut down. I did not do it myself. So yes, killing of the cherry trees by proxy when I was in my 50s, not as a young man. Also, I was supposed to have thrown a $50 across the Potomac or the Rappahannock. There are variations on the story. Well, those of you, how many have had occasion to visit my home, Mount Vernon? I understand that it is open to the visiting public, and I see a few hands have been raised. You know that the Potomac in front of my home is 1 mile wide. That would take extraordinary strength and an extraordinary set of eyes on the other side to see it coming in. A small coin. Also, when I was alleged to have thrown that coin, $50, silver dollar, neither one of those units of currency existed in my lifetime. But if they had, you know, it would have gone farther. The money, the dollar would have gone farther. But when it comes to my life, when I was a young man, I always wanted to rise above the common run. One thing that perhaps distinguishes me is my fiery ambition to accomplish great things. Yes, absolutely. Great things and to become known. To be famous. Oh, I became infamous. Famous is in there. 22 years old and having ambushed a party of Frenchmen, one of whom was a diplomat. He was killed, and I was called an assassin. So when I quoted from Horace Walpole, "The shot fired by a young Virginian in the backwoods of America set the world on fire," that Virginian was most definitely, indubitably, the man you're looking at before you today. So the 7 Years' War, a global conflict. Things were set in motion due to my actions on May the 28th, 1754. Not so very far from the modern day city, as I understand it, of Pittsburgh. I was not formally educated. I did not attend college or university. I was always acutely aware of what I call or refer to as my defective education. But that doesn't mean that I did not continue to learn, obviously, particularly if one has the ability to read and has access to books. And so I did. And so also as well the practical side. No others of my contemporaries had explored the West as I had when it comes to those you perhaps know as the Founding Fathers. It's an interesting expression, the Founding Fathers. So my first trip into what was then the West, Western Virginia, beyond the Blue Ridge into the Shenandoah Valley, I was 16 years of age. I was part of a surveying expedition. Yes, I was a surveyor at 17 years of age. I became official surveyor for the county of Culpeper, Virginia, age 17. I effected hundreds of surveys in my short period of time as a surveyor, saved my money, and acquired land. Lots of it. At my Mount Vernon home, the land holdings, 8,162 acres at the time of my demise in 1799. Now, putting that in terms perhaps you can better understand and envision, that's approximately 8,162 of your football fields worth of property, my Mount Vernon land holdings. Now you might think that excessive. Wait until I divulge the number of acres I had elsewhere. In what is modern-day Western Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Western Pennsylvania, New York, I had over 60,000 acres elsewhere. 60,000. So about 60,000 of your football fields. So quite a bit, so you could say, safely say, and with accuracy say, I was a land speculator, yes, and envisioned a great future for this country. Another question I oftentimes get, now I'm going to treat you all as I have been, as friends and family members. For if I were the stereotypical Washington, I would for the most part be standing silent before you, reserved, coming across as somewhat aloof, and would not answer 9 out of 10 of the questions you proffered to me. There were many things about which a gentleman would not talk, discuss, converse, respond to questions. But what would be my educative value to you if I were to maintain my reserve, to talk little during the time that I've been granted? You could learn nothing from me. You will have the chance to ask me questions, to proffer interrogatives, and please do not be timid about doing so. Do not be shy. This is an opportunity to engage face to face with history, an historical personage. So anything is fair game. And so what I will address, young lady, yes? Another topic of interest. Dentures. I can assure you, the several sets of dentures I did own and wear over the course of my lifetime, not composed of wood. Hippopotamus ivory, livestock animal teeth, and even human teeth were incorporated into the dentition of the dentures, but wood never, wood not at all. No adhesives to maintain position of dentures once inside the mouth. Dr. John Greenwood was my dentist, essentially to the end of my life. During the presidential years, he developed a spring-loaded mechanism. Plates made of lead. I see the head shaking, and yes, they did sit heavy in the mouth, abraded the gums. Spring-loaded. Compress the upper and lower, open, insert, release, and they would spring into place. However, warning, do not become too animated in expression, too talkative or chatty, opening the mouth too wide, because there was the possibility the dentures would be expelled. So when you think about Washington, and you think about my reserve, I began losing teeth at age 26. And I can assure you it wasn't because they were not well cared for. How many of you would say, advertised in your day, your time, here, what is this, the early 21st century? Self-help and do-it-yourself kits of various types and kinds. You know what became something of the rage in the 1740s and 50s and 60s? Dental self-care kits, picks and files, and abrading brushes. And you know what happened? I began to really pay particular attention to my teeth. And I found that I was beginning to encounter problems. And then it becomes a vicious cycle, you see. You believe, oh, well, I am not doing enough. Because what those files were doing, and those picks, they were opening up vulnerabilities in the teeth, in what you would call the enamel. And so then you think you must do more, you're not doing enough. And so you do even more, which increases the damage, and then more in the way of deterioration occurred. That's what I found. That's what others of my time found when they were using those dental kits. So please know that I did not neglect my teeth, but for the sake of being quite, I was determined to keep them clean, but it became that vicious cycle. Does everyone understand? Yes?
Yeah.
Lost my last tooth during my presidential years. It was an upper premolar on the left side that was hanging on. Dr. Greenwood was kind enough to accommodate, there was a gap in my dentures, to accommodate the one, dare I even characterize it as healthy tooth, hanging on until about midway through my second term as Chief Magistrate of the United States of America. So your historians, as I understand it, wonder how much my dental problems contributed to my reserve and hesitancy with respect to talking. Quite a bit. John Adams, I understand, who would become my vice president, who was really quite something with respect to being a member of the Continental Congress. You all are familiar with Mr. Adams, yes? He expressed the wish, because he believed himself to be too talkative, too garrulous, didn't know when to be quiet, to keep his mouth closed. He said, I wish I had General Washington's gift of taciturnity, which means silence. Mr. Jefferson said, in reminiscing about those of his contemporaries, such as Dr. Franklin and myself, he said, I never heard Dr. Franklin or General Washington speak for more than 5 to 7 minutes altogether. They would listen, synopsizing his letter. They would listen, and then they would speak. They would put their shoulders to the heart of the subject, speak to without all the superfluities, the superficialities in others, and go right to the heart of what was at hand as far as the debate, the subject at hand. Knowing when not to speak is just as important as knowing when to speak, and in particular, what to say. Yes? Are we in agreement on that, yes? Now, if you have any questions at this time, please do not hesitate to interject, because I'm treating you all as friends and family, as I stated. Oh, a hand is already up. Thank you. The whole spirit is being demonstrated by this gentleman back.
What would you say was the most important reason for the separation from England?
What was the most important reason for the separation from England? Going back to the year 1769, after the Townshend duties had been imposed on the colonies, taxes on lead, paper, glass, paint, and tea. Taxes. I do not know what your view of taxes may be this day.
Scary.
Now, 2 expressions from my time. No taxation without representation. And the power to tax is the power to destroy. Now, I grant that the colonists from New Hampshire to Georgia, those in England might, in comparison to those of us in the colonies at the time, 1760s, 1770s, we were among the least taxed people in the world. Now, we had become accustomed to passing legislation, including legislation pertaining to taxation, ourselves. We in Virginia, through the House of Burgesses, were accustomed to passing tax measures to tax Virginians. Those in Massachusetts were accustomed to doing the same, as they were in Delaware, Massachusetts, Georgia, the Carolinas, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland. Let's not forget Connecticut and Rhode Island. And then after that 7 Years' War, which I had such a hand in starting, expensive, England won and acquired quite the extended empire as a result. But she also accumulated a debt for the sake of prosecuting that war for 7 years. And so England has a debt She has need to pay down that debt, and she goes looking for revenue measures, sources of revenue measures, in order to defray the costs of the 7 Years' War, what we called in the colonies the French and Indian War. And so you have the Sugar Act, 1764. You have the Stamp Act, 1765. The Declaratory Act, 1766, because the Stamp Act was repealed, and there were celebrations throughout the colonies. But Parliament in 1766, in the wake of repeal of the Stamp Act, passed the Declaratory Act. What was declared by Parliament? That Parliament has the power, the right, in all cases whatsoever, to tax the colonies. Most colonists ignored the Declaratory Act. They were busy celebrating the repeal of the Stamp Act. But Parliament put us on notice that just because we repealed the Stamp Act doesn't mean you have won, that we will concede that we don't have the power to tax you at all. So the Townshend duties, of which I just spoke, Charles Townshend, Chancellor of the Exchequer, treasurer, if you will. He has this idea that the colonies are going to pay, quote, their fair share. Well, we made the case that during the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, we had taxed ourselves. We had helped pay for the cost of the war. And also the insult to say that we had not paid our fair share, when we in fact had. We made contributions to the cause, blood and treasure. Profoundly insulting to say otherwise. You might notice that it got me worked up. The power to take, the power to destroy. Think about it, as I'm sure you have in the 21st century. Living it. Oh my goodness. It is really quite something when you think about how quickly loyal colonists engaged in revolution. We did not call it the American Revolution during the time period. Is that of interest to you? Yes?
Yes.
We called it the cause, or the War for Independence. The American Revolution, as an expression to refer to the time period 1775 to 1783, would come later. But what sets this in motion? Taxation. And then, of course, the ministry in Great Britain, they decided that individuals who committed crimes, certain crimes in the colonies, would not have an opportunity to be tried by their peers in the colonies. They would be transported across the Atlantic to England for trial. Boo, she said. Yes, I agree. What we believed we were witnessing when we talk about the rights of Englishmen and Englishwomen, a tradition going back hundreds of years to Magna Carta. We believed, despite the fact that we were not the most highly taxed, things were not onerous compared to those in Great Britain. They were paid. Believe me, they were paid. That's why the ministry, those in Great Britain, said, what are they so upset about in the colonies? I mean, even the taxes that we are passing, imposing, if you will, are not that egregious. They're not that onerous. But we had been accustomed since the 1600s, because of what one Englishman referred to as salutary neglect. We have neglected our colonies, it was said. They have been accustomed to doing things on their own. And when England turns its attention on us and begins to make impositions that we found to be alarming, we believed we saw the writing on the wall, that it may not be onerous, but this could become so over time. The erosion of our rights and liberties as Englishmen and English women. I want to ask you a question, and I have no idea about what you are dealing with in your time and place, and it matters not. And to the young people in here, I want to pose one simple question, seemingly so on the face of it. Where do our rights come from? That was quick. If you all are familiar with Mr. Jefferson's Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women, not in the original text, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, capital C, with certain unalienable rights. That among these, and it's not an exhaustive list, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that's not an exhaustive list. He says that among these rights, how often have I heard, as I am summoned back from the pages of history, summoned from the history books, I asked a group of 8th graders the same question. A number of them and their teachers said, government gives us our rights. Oh my. Natural rights, natural law philosophy. Whether one believes in a supreme being or not matters not. I would still say, as would Mr. Jefferson, I'm not being presumptuous, that they have inherent rights regardless. If some human, group of humans, or a government, a collective, has the power to grant, it has the power to take away. Does everyone follow me?
Oh, yes.
The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of providence, is what we believed. And if you don't care to believe it, still, please know, even atheists, we would say, have those inherent rights. They are born with them. They are part of you. And if you are oppressed, you still have those rights, even though you do not have the ability to exercise them. You still have them. You might ask, what's the difference? There is a big difference, philosophically and otherwise. Now, I was no philosopher, but I understood more than the basics, yes, for which we were contending. So we're born with these rights. Do you understand, and I think you do, how quickly you answered, many people nodding. How rare in the world that is. The mindset that we have rights. They're inherent. They inhere within us. That wasn't always the case. You know how many times that I have been antagonized over the past 5 years, being summoned from the history books? When it comes to certain institutions we were not 100% perfect. Yes, do you agree? We are not demigods. We're human beings trying to find our way and do the best we could, not only by ourselves, do justice to our contemporaries, those of us who were fighting a war for independence. We were contending for you as well. As I said on more than one occasion to the troops, the Continental Army, we contend for the fate of unborn millions. It wasn't just about us. But once the generation, my generation, passed away, then it was up to others. I cannot help what transpired. Someone asked, and this was during my presidency, talking about the issue of slavery. Mr. Edmund Randolph, my Attorney General, and Mr. Thomas Jefferson, my Secretary of State, were present. as we were talking about this institution of slavery, that if there was any issue that could result in the dissolution of the young republic, it was that institution, enslavement. And I said, if there were to be a civil war, and if it was fought over that issue, I would pack my bags and move to the northward from Mount Vernon and die of a broken heart. Two witnesses to that conversation. It was for union, the perpetuation of it, independence in our dealings with foreign nations. I did not ever subscribe to, join a party. I was even being called old-fashioned in my day. Old Republican Roman idea or notion of faction and party. If you have the best interests of your country at heart, why have need or cause to form a party or a faction? Party and faction were classically identified with narrow, parochial, selfish interests. It becomes all about the people of the party, the faction. It's not about the country as a whole. If I had joined the Democratic Republicans or the Federalists, things would have begun to fall apart. Because my role as a unifier, as an adhesive, a glue, if you will, to bind the Republic together. Remember, when I became Chief Magistrate of the United States in 1789, I was the only president in the world. It was a world of monarchy, rule by one. That's what monarchy means. Rule by one. Call the monarch what you will. Queen, king, emperor, empress, czar, or czarina. This was something new. As John Adams said when it came to he was questioned about the Constitution. John Adams had said, it has oftentimes been said that there is nothing new under the sun. Some of you know where that comes from, springs from. Nothing new under the sun. But then he went on to say, let us suppose that that is not quite true. That what we have created here is indeed something new under the sun. A republic, if you can keep it, said Dr. Benjamin Franklin in the wake of the convention in Philadelphia in 1787. He was queried upon exiting Carpenter's Hall, what have we? What have we? In the form of a document, a governing document. He said, a republic, if you can keep it. And I'm so very pleased that here in the 21st century that up to this point in time you have kept it. But it's not an easy thing to keep. I understand it's still a rare bloom in the world. Too many people might take for granted the freedom that they have, and it wasn't always thus. And even in your world today, I suppose it isn't always thus. Not every country is a republic. There isn't participatory democracy all over the world. Yes? A rare bloom. And to keep it requires hard work. And it really does, as I said, the most important office in a republic is perhaps the office of citizen. And in a government of, by, and for the people, it is absolutely essential that the citizenry be educated and do not cede or give up their judgment with respect to the issues at hand. To be educated, to exercise good judgment, to vote, and to stand for office. That's what it was called in my day. We did not run after an office. The office would seek the person. So I stood for the presidency. And it certainly found me. Twice unanimously elected Chief Magistrate of the United States of America. But not easy. People ask, did you want the office? I can say that honestly. Sincerely. If you read my diaries, you will find that I wrote, I feel like something of a culprit going off to his place of execution. To go to New York, which was the first capital of the United States under the new Constitution. I was overwhelmed. I was setting forth on a tempestuous ocean. Please know that when I finished services as General of the Continental Army, as the Commander-in-Chief, I resigned my commission at Annapolis, Maryland, 23rd of December, 1783. And that was something that tended to shock and astound the world. It didn't shock and astound the people who knew me. Because here is a man, when all power in so many respects could have been his, he decides to retire. He decides to walk away and resume the life of a private citizen of the Republic. I kept my word. Once victory was attained, over, army disbanded, we go home. No matter what kind of problems or issues we faced, there was no chance I would become a king, no chance I would become a Cromwellian dictator. I returned home. I delivered a speech to the Congress sitting at Annapolis of short duration, stating my intention to leave the great theater of action in order to resume the life of a private citizen of the Republic. And so it was very difficult for me to come out of retirement and attend the Constitutional Convention, because I feared people would think I was breaking my word. That's a form of public service. I said, I am leaving and I am not returning to public service. In other words, I conveyed that I was going into permanent retirement. And it was James Madison, in particular, who convinced me that I must attend what became known as the Constitutional Convention. We called it the Grand Convention at the time. And there I was unanimously selected to be the presiding officer. That was difficult for me, because I did not want to be seen to breaking a promise not to return to public life. And Madison said that people will forgive you. Your country needs you. What they will not forgive, General Washington, is if they believe that your vanity with respect to adhering to your word overrode public concerns. My goodness, he knew where to get me. They will say that you're being vain and you're more concerned with keeping your word than helping your country once again. How do you contend with that kind of an argument? And so I went. And of course, he knew as well that it would draw others, knowing that I would be attending. So if Washington is attending that convention, it must be important and worthy of our attendance. So it, of course, garnered us other worthies from all the other states in attendance. Rhode Island did not send delegates. Rhode Island was content with the Articles of Confederation. Remember, we went beyond our mandate in 1787. Shame on us, I suppose. We were supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation, not consign them to the garbage heap and come up with a new document. I want you to keep in mind human nature. We did not take humanity as we wished it to be, but as we understood it and saw it and experienced it. From the Federalist paper, number 51, authored by James Madison. If men were angels, government would not be necessary. And then to synopsize, if men were governed by angels, checks and balances would not be necessary. But in setting up a government of men over men, must first oblige the government to control itself, then control the government. So, separate branches of government, tension built into the system, multi-layered governmental system, local, state, and federal. Some with overlapping powers to to serve as points of tension back and forth, checks and balances built into the system. Let me ask you this, you have more experience than I met my demise in 1799. Here you are in the 21st century. Was it wise of us with respect to checks and balances?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And separation of powers?
Yes.
Because in some countries, a dictator has the legislative, the executive, and the judicial powers all combined in his or her person. You do not want that. You're not always going to get a benevolent king or dictator. So as Madison stated, auxiliary precautions must be taken. Were we perfect? No. Did we understand that times would change? Yes. So there you have it in the Constitution, an amending process. We knew that times would change, times, mores, customs would change, and that the Constitution should be able to change with it. Not an inflexible document. Also, we Americans have a genius, really, of compromise. If you cannot obtain the full loaf, half a loaf usually will do. But it seems to me, based on some of the interrogatives I've received over the past several years as I've stepped out of the pages of history, everyone wants their full loaf and do not want to compromise whatsoever. And yes, I grant that some things should not be compromised, our principles. Please do not abandon the principles that we held dear when it comes to ideas, conceptions of liberty, equality, justice. Just because we were imperfect, say throw it all out? Oh no, I think that would be a great mistake, and my reading of history tells me that revolutions from the bottom up seldom if ever work out. Easy to destroy, not so easy to build. Take care of what you have, ladies and gentlemen. Take care of what we have here and build on it and be instructed by the past. Yes, I see a hand up. Yes. How do I feel about having my face on the rocks outside? I am honored and privileged and flattered by it. And I would say, in one sense, and I would have said, because on record, when individuals corresponded with me and told me about a statue or some tribute to Washington, I would become somewhat shy, a little embarrassment, perhaps a lot, when they let me know when the Congress made the decision that the federal city was going to be called Washington. I continued to refer to it as the federal city as it was being constructed. And hopefully it did affect its full removal by 1800 to the banks of the Potomac. So with the move of the capital, the Residence Act of 1790, which I signed, New York was only the capital of the United States from 1789 until 1790. From 1790, supposedly until 1800, it was supposed to be Philadelphia. So I never served in the city which would eventually bear my name. As I understand it, Mr. John Adams was the first president to reside within the boundaries of what became known as the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Yes. But a very nice question, but I'm flattered by my image, my visage on the rocks, and humbled by it. It's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Yes.
Did you ever get sick?
Yes, many times. And there were several times before my actual demise that I almost died. Yes. In my youth, you would expect this, dysentery, what we call the bloody flux, malaria up until my demise, was Potomac River Valley, malaria. Mrs. Washington and I had malaria more than once. As a matter of fact, the last full year of my life, malaria, I shed close to 20 pounds, weight loss, alternating fever and ague or chills, as you know. When I was 19, smallpox. island of Barbados. I accompanied my older half-brother to Barbados. He had something you would call today tuberculosis. We called it consumption. And it was thought that by going to a warmer climate, drier climate, a more salutary climate, and there was also a well-known physician on the island of Barbados who had enjoyed some success with patients of consumption, or demonstrating consumption, but the treatment, such as they were, didn't work for him. My beloved older half-brother Lawrence, who had so much, that he did so much in raising, he died in July of 1752, when I was but 20 years of age. But I contracted smallpox. I went with him to Barbados at 19 to accompany him. My sister-in-law, his wife, Anne Fairfax Washington, they had a new child. Sarah was their baby. And she could not travel because of the newborn. And so I was asked to accompany because his wife could not go, my sister-in-law. And while there, smallpox. Now the upside, the leading killer during the American Revolution was smallpox, not bullets. And by the way, I'm going to pass this around really quickly as far as I talked about the shot fired. Would you believe it? Going back to the French and Indian War, the French had established a base of operations at the forks of the Ohio, Fort Duquesne. A large British force under Major General Edward Braddock was dispatched to the colonies in order to mount an attack on Duquesne. I was an aide to Major General Braddock. 9 miles shy of Duquesne, we were ambushed by an inferior, I felt it was an inferior French and Indian force. 5 hours of a horrific nightmare. I had 4 holes through my clothing. 2 horses shot from beneath me. The cover shot from my head, but I emerged unscathed. Here's the .75 caliber smoothbore round. If you want to pass it along, I trust that this audience will return it. It's for demonstration, yes? Has some heft. 4 of those were through my clothing. I'm wearing 5 layers of clothing right now. As I was 23 in 1755. 9th of July, 1755, we were overwhelmingly defeated. General Braddock was shot and killed. One of those through both lungs. He lived, he lingered for 3 days. I effected a retreat. British officer corps that day, 75% reduction in the officer corps, 75%, 3 out of 4 officers killed. As I understand it, the Battle of the Monongahela during the French and Indian War ranks as one of the worst losses in British military history. Men killed, dying, Virginians of the Virginia Regiment, many shot in the back by British soldiers who believed that the members of the Virginia Regiment were trying to run away from the battle, when in fact they were trying to go into the woods, hide behind trees and rocks, and fight the Native Americans in their own way. They were thought to be deserted, and so were shot as they went to take cover, refusing to stand out in the open in formation, trying to fire at an enemy unseen. I was in charge after it was all over to effect the retreat. 23 years old, an aide to General Braddock, who was in the back of a wagon, dying of a wound through both lungs, ended up burying General Braddock in the road of retreat so that Native Americans would not find his body and desecrate it. So wagons rolled over the grave, troops walked over the grave to disguise its location. I was 23 and was in charge of the retreat, what was left of the British force. Quite the responsibility, and that anniversary every July 3rd, when I had to surrender Fort Necessity when I was a young man, to a French and Indian force, and July 9th, 1755, every year those dates were on my mind. course, the happy July 4th, yes?
Yes.
July 3rd and July 9th were unhappy memories, nightmares, the groans, the screams, the cries and lamentation of the troops on the road of retreat are with me still. Any other questions I have gone over? I realize that. My time, usually, again, not so garrulous, more reserved, but you are as family and friends.
More questions?
Yes.
Do you have any childhood memory that influenced you?
Yes, childhood memories. One, did you know I was supposed to go to sea? And you all have my mother to thank, Mary Ball Washington, for refusing to let me go into what you would call the Royal Navy. It was 1747. I was 14 years of age, 15 going on 15, and talk of sending me to sea, and I had fairly packed my bags. And my mother finally said no, and she wanted the whole subject dropped. So in 1747, a life at sea, not for me, apparently. And then, of course, the usual memories one has from childhood. I was born in Virginia, Westmoreland County, about 10 a.m., February 22nd, 1732. I never visited the land of my ancestry, England. Never visited Europe. The only trip I would take outside what would become the future United States was what I more than alluded to just minutes ago, the trip to Barbados, accompanying my older half-brother, Lawrence. But again, the upside of that, smallpox, which I survived, I did not have to risk inoculation, and so had acquired immunity. Number one killer of the revolution was disease. Any war, really, it's disease, malnutrition, famine, not the actual wounds sustained, though those that became infected, wounds that would probably be survived today, oftentimes took the lives of many of my compatriots. So, yes, you had a quick question because I did not want to. Yes. What was that?
How many years?
8 years, 1789 to 1797. And when a third term could have been mine, I demurred. I didn't have any, there were no Prince of People, that's another myth. I did not have any objections against president serving more than 2 terms. I fully expected perhaps to serve 1 term, then I would be able to retire back to Mount Vernon. But no, Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Madison, Henry Knox, and others convinced me, you have to stand for a 2nd term. We're not quite there. The government of the United States, the Constitution, is not on solid ground as yet. And so I relented. But definitely no 3rd term, but I wasn't in principle opposed to it. The Constitution that we composed did not term limit. But I believe that 2 terms were enough for me. I will tell you this, and other people, they chuckle and they laugh because apparently something is going on in your time, of which I'm not aware. Please don't make me aware. I'm going to relate to you some of the challenges I was facing. I was beginning to go deaf. My memory was beginning to fail me in certain respects. I wasn't as quick. And the arthritis that I had been dealing with for several years prior was not attenuating, it was becoming worse. It was well near impossible for me to raise one or both arms above my head. My back was giving me trouble because as I was returning there was one trip I took, one of the 13 times I returned to Mount Vernon during my 8 years as president. I decided to see how work was coming along on the federal city. So several miles north of my Mount Vernon home. And of course, some of you may know my reputation as a horseman. There were challenges associated as I aged. I wasn't the horseman I once was. And I almost lost control of a horse near the federal city, some loose rocks on the hillside. And I managed to retain my position in the saddle but I wrenched my back and it was never the same again. And how many of you experienced back problems? The spasms of the muscle, trying to get through a day. So I did detect some of the chuckling and the knowing glances as individuals looked at each other. That is why, the third term, the partisanship as well. Democratic Republicans, Federalists, and the partisan press. I was increasingly being attacked and criticized. I said 2 terms, I believe, are enough, at least for me. And so I composed what became known as a farewell address. It was submitted to a Philadelphia newspaper, published 19th of September, 1796, in which I stated my intention not to stand for a 3rd term as President of the United States, and then began to dispense advice as one who had served the public for over 40 years of his life. Maintaining union at home, independence abroad when it came to our dealings with foreign nations, avoiding permanent alliances, and knowing that self-interest goes a long way toward explaining how countries interact with each other and why. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been so very kind to me, indulging me for this long. I thank you for your time, and may you enjoy a very happy 4th of July. Oh my goodness, thank you. Now to you all. Thank you very much. Oh, what is this? What is this? Oh, and the 75 caliber round has returned to General. It has made the rounds. Thank you very much. So yes, this was standard for both armies, and the Hessians as well. They used it to the 3 armies. Yes, how are you?